If you'd told Daniel Cole he would lose his job by doing the right thing, he would have called you crazy. But that's exactly what happened on a scorching afternoon when an ambulance broke down and a dying patient's life hung in the balance. Without hesitation, Daniel rushed to fix the vehicle, only to be fired on the spot for leaving his post. Little did he know the person whose life he saved was no ordinary patient, but someone with the power to change his destiny forever. Brace yourself for a breathtaking ride packed with sacrifice, heartbreak, and an astonishing twist of fate. Daniel Cole was not born into wealth, nor did he have much luck. At 29, he felt centuries old, his spirit weighed down by the everyday battles of life. He lived in a cramped studio apartment on the outskirts of Flint, Michigan, an old industrial city that had seen better days. His father had been a factory worker at General Motors back when the city thrived. As the factories closed and times got tough, his father lost his job, and Daniel grew up learning how easily prosperity could vanish. From a young age, Daniel learned to fix things, radios, bicycles, cheap second-hand cars out of necessity. He took pride in his gift for mechanics, a skill that shone through even in the bleakest of circumstances. When he was 16, his father passed away from a lingering illness. Daniel's mother cleaned houses for a living, and he took on every odd job he could find to contribute from mowing lawns to clearing out gutters. Yet no matter how many hours he worked, there never seemed to be enough money. The world looked at him as though he were invisible, or worse, insignificant. After finishing high school, college was not an option. Instead, he went to work in a local auto shop, hoping his mechanical talents might one day elevate him to something better. His dream was to open his own garage, Cole's Auto Care, he'd call it. But dreams were expensive. Rent had to be paid. His mother's medical bills piled up. He tried side gigs lifting heavy boxes at a warehouse doing engine tune-ups at half the regular price out of his neighbor's garage. He saved every penny, but the piggy bank of his ambitions always seemed to have a leak. His boss, Chuck Murdoch, owned Murdoch Auto Repairs, a bustling mechanics shop near downtown. It wasn't exactly a dream job. Chuck was a hard-nosed businessman who cut corners when he could. He paid minimum wage and expected maximum loyalty. Still, Daniel stuck with it because he believed in earning an honest living. On the day his life changed, it was blazing hot, the kind of August heat that made the air itself shimmer. Daniel was already under the hood of a beat-up pickup truck when he heard sirens and screeching tires. An ambulance, battered and old, sputtered to a stop just outside the shop. Smoke poured from its engine. The medics yelled that their patient was critical, a woman in dire need of immediate hospital care. Instinct empathy and a trained mechanic's ear propelled Daniel forward. Without waiting for permission, he grabbed a toolbox and ran to the ambulance. The engine belt had snapped, hoses were leaking. The two paramedics were frantic, the patient barely holding onto consciousness on the stretcher. Every second counted, and Daniel knew it. He labored as though his own life depended on it, hands flying across the overheated metal, ignoring the searing pain whenever his fingers brushed scorching parts. After a few panicked minutes, he had fashioned a temporary fix, a patch of sorts that could hold just long enough for the ambulance to reach the hospital. When he slammed the hood shut, the engine roared back to life. One of the paramedics yelled a thank you, and off they went, sirens wailing into the blazing summer air. Breathless, sweat-soaked Daniel turned back and saw Chuck standing there, arms folded across his barrel chest. The scowl on his face was enough to darken the sun. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Chuck barked. "You left that truck job half-finished and you used my tools without logging them out. You think you can just do freebies and waste our parts." Daniel tried to explain the gravity of the situation, that a patient was dying, that the hospital was 10 minutes away, that there was no time to do anything else. But Chuck's anger was set aflame. In an industry hammered by rising costs, every tool, every part, every moment was money. And Chuck was not one to tolerate charity, unless he was getting a tax break for it. "That's it," Chuck thundered. "Pack up. Don't bother coming back tomorrow. You're fired." Those words echoed in Daniel's mind. He stood there, mouth dry, heart pounding. Fired. It seemed so inconceivable, fired for saving a life. He didn't even get a chance to change out of his grease-stained shirt or pick up his last paycheck before Chuck slammed the office door in his face. That evening, Daniel trudged home, heartbreak mixing with confusion. He had done the right thing. If he could turn back time, he would do it again. But now, reality slapped him across the face. No job meant no income, no way to pay rent or feed himself, let alone help his mother. And for what? For saving a patient he'd likely never even meet. He collapsed on his threadbare couch, looking at the flickering light bulb on the ceiling. He didn't cry. He was too exhausted. His phone beeped a message from his landlord, reminding him about rent. Ironically due the following week. Could life get any more unfair? As night fell, Daniel clenched his fists. There was a faint sense of pride in his chest. At least he had done something right, something good. If the world punished him for that, then so be it. He would figure out his next move, because no matter how many times he was knocked down, Daniel Cole knew only one way to keep going. He just never imagined that fate and an unexpected figure from that very afternoon was about to help him back to his feet. The next morning, Daniel awoke with a gnawing anxiety. His routine was broken, no job to head to, no uniform to pull on. He lay still for a few moments, hearing the noisy hum of traffic outside. His mother, Linda Cole, lived 3 miles away, in a small assisted living complex. She needed his financial support for her medication and therapy. How would he manage? He dragged himself up, showered and ate a stale piece of bread for breakfast, washing it down with tap water. He scanned the classifieds on his phone, nothing but construction gigs requiring licenses he didn't have, or restaurants offering minimum wage part-time at best. He found himself leaning on the windowsill, staring at the sunrise, recalling the paramedics' frantic yells. He wondered if the patient had survived. Shaking off the memory, he got into his old Honda Civic, a car that once ran smoothly thanks to his own mechanical skills, but now threatened to quit. He headed to Linda's complex. They had a small courtyard with a bench where the two of them would sit whenever he visited. Linda was already there, sunlight reflecting off her wiry grey hair. She smiled when she saw him, but it quickly faded as she caught sight of the sadness shadowing his features. "Danny, what's wrong?" she asked, voice trembling. "Did something happen at work?" Daniel exhaled, sitting beside her, and gently placing a hand over her frail one. "Mum, I got fired yesterday." He expected her to gasp, perhaps even burst into tears. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment and took a measured breath. "Why?" So he explained. How the ambulance needed an immediate fix. How he jumped in to help. How Chuck demanded that every second be accounted for in billable hours. And how Daniel's sense of moral responsibility led him to do a free emergency repair. He concluded with Chuck firing him on the spot. Linda listened, her fingers tightening around Daniel's hand. She had taught him compassion after all. Even though it hurt to see her son jobless, she felt a surge of pride. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "A life is worth more than a paycheck, Danny." He stayed with her for an hour, discussing next steps. Linda encouraged him to apply at other shops. She offered him what little money she had in her account. But Daniel refused. He would never allow her to sacrifice her own well-being. He left promising that he'd figure something out. Back at his apartment, he sent his resume, though not very long, to every repair shop and dealership within a 50-mile radius. The day stretched into evening with no responses. His phone rang only once from Chuck's office manager to confirm that Daniel wouldn't receive severance pay because he had been fired for cause. As he scrolled through social media feeling hopeless, he saw a local news article about the shortage of ambulances in Flint. The piece mentioned how one ambulance had almost stalled with a critical patient on board, but was miraculously repaired on the spot by a selfless mechanic. The patient, a middle-aged woman, was stable at the hospital, details undisclosed. Daniel sighed, a swirl of emotions flooding him. At least he thought she made it. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of relief. No matter how bad things looked for him, at least he had made a difference. In the hallway outside his apartment, he heard raised voices. His landlord, Martin Bradley, had come by. "Daniel, are you home?" The knock was loud enough to wake the dead. "Rent's due in 3 days. I can't keep letting it slide." Daniel rubbed his tired eyes and opened the door. "Martin, I'll get it to you. I lost my job, but I'm job hunting non-stop. Please just give me a little more time." The landlord eyed him skeptically. "I can give you a week, maybe. After that, I have to put the place back on the market." He walked away, muttering about people not paying their obligations, leaving Daniel with a knot in his stomach. Alone again, Daniel felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. It would be easy to give up to walk away, but the memory of that ambulance fix gave him a spark. Sometimes the hardest decisions in life were the most righteous ones. He pulled out a tattered notebook from a drawer. Inside were pages of sketches and outlines of his dream garage, Cole's Auto Care. The name scrawled across the top. He had no money, no job, and in a week he might not have a home. But he had a passion, and somewhere deep inside, a glimmer of hope. While Daniel wrestled with uncertainty, the very person he had unknowingly saved was confined to a private room in a local hospital. Her name was Mary Barra. Yes, the Mary Barra, who served as the CEO of General Motors. She'd come to Flint for a low-profile inspection of a struggling GM-related factory and to quietly visit a community program. She preferred these under-the-radar tours to truly understand what her employees and the local communities experienced away from cameras and press releases. Yet on her way, she felt a sudden piercing pain in her chest. The ambulance was called, but in Flint, where resources were often stretched thin, the vehicle that arrived was older, less reliable. And so in the middle of a scorching street with her life at risk, the ambulance engine gave out. Fate led Daniel Cole, an obscure mechanic with a heart of gold, to save her life without having the slightest idea who she was. When Mary regained consciousness in the hospital, her thoughts were a jumble. She recalled the paramedics' panic, the dreadful sound of a failing engine, and a faint recollection of someone's urgent hands beneath the hood. She asked one of the nurses if she could speak with the paramedics who'd brought her in. 2 days later, one of the paramedics, a man named Jonas Martinez, stepped in. Mary, still weak but alert, probed him about the breakdown. "It was a local mechanic who fixed us up," Jonas replied. Young guy looked like he worked at some auto shop downtown. He saved your life. If that engine hadn't been repaired quickly, you might not have made it to the hospital in time. Do you know his name?" Mary asked, her curiosity mounting. "I think they said his name was Daniel Jonas," said, squinting in thought. "Daniel Cole, if I remember correctly." He didn't even hesitate. Mary's eyes narrowed in concentration. She felt a swirl of gratitude and guilt for not even knowing the man who saved her. A nurse came in to adjust her IV, and Mary decided to keep the matter private for now. There was no reason to broadcast that the CEO of GM had nearly died in an old ambulance. She preferred to keep her personal matters discreet, focusing on her recovery. In the quiet hours, Mary mulled over Daniel Cole's situation. How does a skilled mechanic end up working on a street in that heat, risking it all, even though it wasn't his responsibility? Was he that compassionate, or simply fearless? She resolved to find him once she was discharged, to properly thank him at the very least. Meanwhile, in her capacity as CEO, Mary had the resources to locate almost anyone. If her corporate security team could track down unfaithful suppliers, they could certainly find an altruistic mechanic. But something in Mary hesitated. She wanted to approach this personally, not as a powerful executive who might overwhelm an unsuspecting savior. She needed to be sure about the situation first. Unaware that the wheels of destiny had begun turning, Daniel spent the rest of that week wandering from one repair shop to another. He left his resume at local dealerships, big box auto centers, and smaller garages. Everywhere he was greeted with polite refusals, no openings, or they'd keep his name on file. Desperate, he took a short gig, helping a friend fix up a used RV. It paid enough for groceries, but would barely cover half his rent. He considered telling his mother that he might have to move in, but she had only a single room in a care facility. That wouldn't work. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. His eviction loomed, job prospects slim. On a Saturday morning, Daniel rummaged through his meager savings. He needed a miracle. But sometimes miracles take unusual forms. Late that afternoon, as he returned from the grocery store, where he'd bought little more than canned soup and a loaf of bread, he noticed a sleek black SUV parked outside his apartment building. A well-dressed man stood beside it, scanning the front doors. The man looked distinctly out of place in that run-down neighborhood. Daniel tried to skirt past him discreetly, not in the mood for small talk. Yet the moment Daniel neared the man, fixed his gaze on him. "Excuse me," the stranger said, stepping forward. "Are you Mr. Daniel Cole?" Daniel blinked, hugging his grocery bag a bit tighter. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" The man offered a formal smile and introduced himself as Robert Wilson. "I'm a personal assistant to someone who would very much like to speak with you," he said, handing Daniel a sleek business card. It read, "Mary Barra, CEO, General Motors, Detroit Headquarters." Seeing those words made Daniel's pulse spike. He almost laughed. What business would the CEO of GM have with him? "Is this a joke?" he asked, half-dazed. Robert shook his head. "No joke. Ms. Barra wishes to meet with you at your earliest convenience." Confusion, suspicion, and curiosity wrestled in Daniel's mind. He recalled hearing that Mary Barra was one of the most influential people in the auto industry. Could it be that she'd heard about the ambulance story? Or perhaps it was something else entirely. "Look," Daniel said slowly, "I'm just a mechanic who got fired. I don't see why Ms. Barra prefers to discuss details in person." Robert interjected, his voice polite but firm. He pulled out an envelope. "She asked me to provide this for your immediate needs. A small token of gratitude for your trouble." Daniel opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000. His vision blurred at the sight of all those zeros, a sum that could buy him a few months of stability, more than he had seen in a long time. "But I can't accept this," Daniel stammered, every fiber of his pride objecting. "I don't even know what it's for." Robert pressed the envelope gently back into Daniel's hand. "It's just a gesture to show you that Miss Barra is serious. She would like to meet you next week. The specifics are written on the card." Without further explanation, Robert extended his hand in farewell. "I'll be in touch," he said, and climbed back into the SUV. Daniel stood there, groceries in one hand, envelope in the other, heart pounding like a jackhammer. Life had just thrown him a lifeline, or a trap, he couldn't be sure. With rent looming, no job, and a mother in need, how could he possibly refuse? That evening, Daniel sat in his small kitchen, with the envelope laid out in front of him. He examined the cashier's check multiple times, expecting it to vanish like a dream. The official watermark glistened under the overhead light, affirming it was real. His phone vibrated. A message from Martin, the landlord. "Don't forget rent due Monday. No exceptions." The text had a certain finality to it. Swallowing a lump in his throat, Daniel realized that this check could not have come at a better time. But what did Mary Barra want from him? His mind spun. He'd never met her, never even glimpsed her in person. The only possible link was the ambulance incident. Could she have discovered that the man who fixed it was him? And why such a substantial gift? Sleep evaded him that night. He had questions that twisted into more questions, forming knots in his thoughts. By dawn, he concluded that he needed to meet her. At the very least, he had to understand why GM's CEO was reaching out. He decided to deposit enough of the check to pay his rent, keep the rest aside, and see what happened. On Monday morning, he visited the bank. The teller's eyebrows shot up at the sight of the check. Daniel felt self-conscious, worried that the bank might suspect he was doing something dishonest. But the transaction proceeded without a hitch. Relieved, Daniel next went to settle the rent with Martin. The landlord accepted the payment with mild surprise, nodding curtly. "Right on time. Keep it up." Daniel Cole had bought himself a small reprieve, but it was still only temporary. A few days later, Robert Wilson called to confirm Daniel's meeting with Mary Barra. He explained that Mary was still recovering from a serious medical condition and preferred a low-key environment. They agreed to meet at a modest conference room in a private medical facility on the outskirts of Flint. Daniel dressed in his best clothes, faded black trousers, and a button-down shirt that he only wore on special occasions. Nervous energy coursed through him. He arrived exactly 15 minutes early, clutching the business card, and an uneasy feeling that his life was about to change. The medical facility was a secure modern building. A stern but polite security guard escorted him to the 3rd floor. There, Daniel was guided into a small conference room with a sweeping view of the city. A handful of corporate-looking people sat at a rectangular table. But Mary Barra was instantly recognizable, her short blonde hair framing a determined yet kind face he'd seen countless times in automotive news articles. She stood when Daniel entered, offering a thin smile. She appeared paler than in photos, a bit more fragile, likely from her recent health scare. "Mr. Cole," she began, her voice tinged with warmth. "Thank you for coming." Daniel nodded, unsure what to say. Thank you for your generosity, Ms. Barra. I still don't fully understand." She raised a hand, indicating he should take a seat. He did, feeling everyone's eyes on him. Robert Wilson was there, nodding encouragingly. Another woman, who introduced herself as Dr. Pamela Rhodes, explained she was overseeing Mary's post-hospital care. Once the introductions concluded, Mary leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Mr. Cole, I believe you were the mechanic who fixed the ambulance that brought me here 2 weeks ago." Daniel's breath caught. So it was about that. The magnitude of it hit him. Mary Barra, the CEO of one of the biggest car companies in the world, had been the patient. He swallowed. I didn't know, Miss Barra. They said it was an emergency. I just did what I could." Mary nodded, eyes shining with gratitude. "You probably saved my life. The paramedics told me that without that quick fix, we might not have made it to the hospital in time." Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He felt a mixture of shock, pride, and lingering confusion. Anyone would have done the same in that situation. He said, embarrassed by her praise. Her gaze flicked to Robert, then back to Daniel. "You'd be surprised how many people would have hesitated." "I'm deeply grateful, Mr. Cole. Your actions were selfless, and I've learned you lost your job because of it." Daniel felt a surge of emotion. He thought about Chuck's furious face, the humiliating way he'd been fired. "Yes, I did. But I don't regret helping." Mary looked genuinely moved. "When I heard that, I felt compelled to reach out. I can't stand by while someone who acted so courageously suffers as a result." She paused as though summoning courage to speak her next words. "That check was just a small token. I'd like to do more for you if you'll allow it." Daniel stiffened, a swirl of excitement, apprehension, and pride making his heart race. Accepting charity felt uncomfortable, but he also sensed a genuine sincerity in her. She wasn't some aloof executive tossing money from a distance. She seemed genuinely invested in helping. He cleared his throat. Well, Ms. Barra, I'm in a tough spot right now, but I'm not looking for a handout." A flicker of amusement passed across Mary's face. "I assumed as much. Actually, I have a proposal. General Motors is always looking for skilled mechanics and innovators, not just for our production lines, but in specialized teams, pilot programs, or even concept garages that develop new technologies. I'd like you to consider coming on board." Daniel's jaw practically hit the floor. A job offer from GM. It was beyond anything he'd ever dared dream. At the same time, a seed of skepticism sprouted. Was this a pity hire, or was it truly about his talent? "I don't know what to say," he stammered. "I have basic certifications, a high school diploma, not much else." Mary glanced at Robert, who picked up the explanation. "Your references, some from your prior job, and a few from your freelance clients, speak highly of your ingenuity and work ethic. We can arrange further training." Mary leaned in. "I'd like to personally see you succeed, Mr. Cole. GM has a facility not far from here. We could start you as an apprentice in advanced vehicle prototypes. If you prove yourself, the sky's the limit." Daniel's hands trembled on the table. A wave of relief, disbelief, and gratitude coursed through him. "Thank you," he finally managed. "I'd love to. I'd work hard, I promise." Mary offered a reassuring smile. "One more thing. Call me Mary." Then with a light chuckle she added, "You saved my life. We can at least be on a first-name basis." She rose, signaling an end to the formalities, and extended her hand. Daniel stood and shook it, heart hammering with excitement. "Thank you, Mary," he said softly. Thus began a new chapter in Daniel's life, one he never saw coming. As they said their goodbyes, Mary promised to keep in touch, especially about the specifics of his new role. Walking out of that conference room, Daniel felt like he was floating. He had walked in jobless, aimless, and left with the promise of a transformative opportunity. At home, he stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. If someone had told him last month that he'd be working for GM under the mentorship of Mary Barra herself, he would have laughed in their face. Yet the universe worked in mysterious ways. Despite the heartbreak and humiliation of losing his old job, his willingness to help a total stranger had opened a door to a future he could scarcely imagine. The following week, Daniel reported to a General Motors satellite facility in Flint. Robert had already emailed him instructions and a provisional ID. Though unaccustomed to corporate environments, Daniel was determined to prove he belonged. His new world was a stark contrast from the grimy, cluttered auto shop at Murdoch's. Polished floors reflected overhead fluorescent lights, and the smell of engine oil was faint, overshadowed by the hum of high-tech equipment. His direct supervisor was a middle-aged engineer named Caroline Wu, known for her brilliant designs in hydrogen fuel cell technology. From the moment Daniel stepped into her lab, he was both awestruck and a bit terrified. Computers, advanced machinery, and half-built prototypes of experimental vehicles surrounded them. The staff wore crisp lab coats or GM-branded coveralls. To Daniel, it felt like stepping onto another planet. But Caroline greeted him with a warm smile. "You must be Daniel Cole. Mary spoke highly of you." Daniel forced a smile, trying not to look as overwhelmed as he felt. "I'm excited to learn Dr. Wu." "Call me Caroline," she insisted. "We're pretty informal in here. What matters is the work. Now let's get you settled." She introduced him to the rest of the team. They were mechanical engineers, software developers, and designers. One of them, a young man about Daniel's age named Jamal, gave him a fist bump and said, "Heard you did a MacGyver on an ambulance." "Respect." Daniel flushed simultaneously, pleased and embarrassed. He noticed that none of them seemed to look down on him, even though he was just a newly hired mechanic. In fact, they appeared curious, as though he possessed some rare, intangible quality that corporate training couldn't teach: real-world grit and a knack for problem-solving under pressure. Caroline escorted him to his workstation, pointing out the specialized tools and diagnostic equipment. "For now, I want you to get comfortable. We'll start with some simpler tasks, but eventually we'll have you working on advanced prototypes. Trust me, you'll find your way." Daniel inhaled the faint scent of metal and plastic as he opened a tool chest with shining new wrenches. It felt surreal, so much top-of-the-line equipment at his disposal. He thought back to the rickety shelves at Murdoch's, where he had to beg for replacement parts. Here, the possibilities felt endless. He spent his first day shadowing technicians, absorbing as much as he could. Later, during a coffee break, he wandered a glass hallway that overlooked the facility's test track. Below, he glimpsed a futuristic SUV zooming around corners with an electric hum. He found himself smiling, enthralled by the future he was suddenly a part of. On day 2, Caroline called him into her office. She showed him a blueprint for a new type of eco-friendly ambulance GM was designing in partnership with local hospitals, an initiative sparked by none other than Mary Barra's personal experience. The blueprint included a design for a backup generator system, meant to prevent breakdowns like the one Daniel had encountered. "We're in the early stages," Caroline explained, "but Mary specifically requested that you be involved. Your experience under actual duress is valuable. Can you think of any modifications that might help a mechanic on the ground in a pinch?" Daniel stared at the blueprint, heart pounding. He never expected such responsibility so soon. Yet the memory of the failing ambulance still burned in his mind. He remembered the cramped engine layout, the absence of a quick bypass or an easily accessible spare belt. Tentatively, he pointed out a few ideas, an improved pulley system that could be replaced rapidly, color-coded wiring harnesses for quick identification, and a collapsible toolkit stored within a hidden compartment. Caroline's eyes lit up. She scribbled notes. This is exactly the insight we need. For the next few weeks, Daniel poured himself into the project. Each night he returned to his dingy apartment mentally exhausted, but oddly satisfied. The job was challenging, but it gave him a sense of purpose he'd never felt before. His mother Linda beamed with pride when he told her about his new position. One Wednesday afternoon, as he was taking a lunch break at the facility's cafeteria, Daniel saw Mary Barra again. She was conversing with an older gentleman in a suit, perhaps another executive. She spotted Daniel, excused herself, and approached his table. The eyes of everyone in the cafeteria followed her like magnets. "Mind if I join you?" she asked with a friendly smile. N. "Not at all," Daniel replied hastily, putting down his sandwich. Mary sat across from him, ignoring the stares. "How's your first few weeks, Daniel?" He took a moment to gather his thoughts. "It's incredible. I'm learning so much. Thank you again, Mary. This opportunity, it's life-changing." She rested her elbows on the table, leaning in conspiratorially. "I'm glad you're thriving. I want you to know that you're here because you earned it, not just because you saved me, but because you have real talent. Don't forget that." His heart swelled with gratitude. He nodded, too overwhelmed to articulate a proper response. "You know," Mary continued, "I grew up in a working-class family too. My father was a die maker at Pontiac, and I've always believed in recognizing potential wherever it's found. You exemplify that, Daniel." He managed a small smile. "I just hope I can live up to your faith in me." She reached out and lightly tapped his hand. "You already have. Now keep going." In that moment, Daniel realized that Mary Barra wasn't just a distant executive. She genuinely cared about the people in her company and the communities they served. It made him all the more determined to succeed, not just for himself, but to prove to her that her trust was well placed. As Daniel's new life took off, his old one lurked in the background. One day he stopped by his former workplace, Murdoch Auto Repairs, to pick up the last paycheck Chuck had owed him. The memory of that humiliating firing still stung. But Daniel needed that money. He had promised Linda he'd pay for her latest round of physical therapy. He walked into the shop wearing the GM coveralls that had become his new uniform. Instantly he felt eyes on him, some with curiosity, others with jealousy or contempt. He made his way to the office where Chuck sat behind a battered desk. Chuck looked up, sneering. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Hero Mechanic." Daniel forced himself to remain calm. "I just came for my final paycheck. It should have been ready weeks ago." Chuck opened a drawer, rummaging through papers. His lips curled in annoyance. "Funny how you land on your feet after leaving me high and dry." Daniel bristled. "You fired me, Chuck, for saving a life." The older man slammed a folder on the desk. "You broke protocol, used my tools and parts. I have a business to run, kid. Whatever helps you sleep at night," Daniel muttered, snatching the paycheck from Chuck's outstretched hand. Chuck sneered again. "Heard you got some cushy job at GM. Don't go thinking you're better than us, Cole. Corporate doesn't care about little guys." Daniel met his gaze evenly. "Maybe some corporations don't. But Mary Barra does. She's done more for me in 2 weeks than you did in 2 years. Good luck with your shop, Chuck." He walked out, ignoring the string of curses Chuck spat at his back. Outside, he exhaled shakily, hating how the confrontation had rattled him, yet a part of him felt vindicated Chuck could keep his bitterness. Daniel had moved on to bigger, better things. Still, the altercation cast a shadow over Daniel's thoughts. For so long he'd believed the world was stacked against him, that kindness was rarely rewarded. Yet here he was, living proof that sometimes Wolf gave second chances. He needed to remind himself of that more often. Later that week, as Daniel focused on the eco-friendly ambulance project, he received a text from Mary, feeling better these days. Would like to meet up. Coffee. The casual tone amused him. The CEO of GM was texting him like an old friend. He replied that he'd be happy to. They met at a small cafe near the facility. Mary arrived alone, wearing a simple blouse and trousers, looking far less the corporate titan and more like a friendly neighbor. They ordered coffees, and Daniel insisted on paying. Mary allowed it with a gracious smile. After settling into a corner table, Mary said, "I wanted to check on your progress personally. Caroline told me about your contributions. She's impressed." Daniel sipped his coffee, feeling a sense of pride well up inside him. "I'm doing my best, but I still have a lot to learn." "That's a good sign," Mary said. "Never lose that hunger." A comfortable silence settled between them. Daniel felt a wave of gratitude for Mary, but also a growing admiration that went beyond her status as CEO. There was something kind, compassionate, almost nurturing about her. Perhaps it was how she'd looked after him, ensuring he had every chance to succeed, or the way she listened with genuine interest. He ventured, "How are you feeling, by the way?" "After you know the ambulance scare." A flicker of fatigue crossed her eyes. "Better, but it was a wake-up call. We push ourselves so hard, thinking we're invincible, especially in roles like mine. I'm trying to be more mindful of stress and rest." Daniel nodded. "I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. The world needs you around." She laughed softly, a sound that brightened her features. "The corporate world, maybe. But personally, I'm just grateful to be alive. Every day now feels like a gift." They talked a while longer about GM's direction, about Daniel's mother, about Linda's health struggles. Mary listened attentively when Daniel mentioned the rising cost of care. "If there's anything we can do to help, let me know," she offered. Daniel shook his head. "I appreciate it, but I'll manage. You've done enough." They parted with a shared sense of understanding, each returning to their responsibilities, but carrying a subtle undercurrent of a growing bond. Over the next month, Daniel's involvement in the eco-friendly ambulance project deepened. He contributed practical hands-on solutions while learning the finer points of engineering from Caroline and the team. The synergy was electric. Each challenge they overcame made the final product more robust. During this period, Mary occasionally checked in. Sometimes she did so in person at the facility. Other times she texted or called. Their conversations drifted from professional to personal. He learned she was a widow. Her husband had passed several years ago. She discovered he never knew his father well, and that he was fiercely devoted to his mother. One crisp fall evening, Mary invited Daniel to a GM charity event in Detroit. She insisted it would be a good opportunity to network, to show him off to some of the company's bigwigs. Daniel was flattered but nervous. Formal events were not his forte. Still, he rented a decent suit. He couldn't fathom wearing GM coveralls to a black tie affair. The event was hosted in a grand hall with sparkling chandeliers and marble floors. Tables draped in white linen circled a raised stage where a live band played soft jazz. Mary appeared radiant in an elegant navy blue gown. She spotted Daniel and guided him through the crowd, introducing him to various executives, engineers and board members. Most of them were polite, but seemed more interested in greeting Mary than engaging with Daniel. Still, he received a few encouraging nods. Some had heard about the hero mechanic, who'd joined the advanced projects team. Others merely saw him as an intriguing curiosity. Either way, Daniel felt out of place like a fish in an aquarium being observed. As the night wore on, Mary seemed to sense his discomfort. She gently steered him away from the throng. They found a quieter corner near the orchestra. "I'm sorry," she said, a note of concern in her voice. "I dragged you here so you could make connections, but you look overwhelmed." Daniel shrugged, cheeks warming. "I'm not used to all this glitz, but I appreciate the chance." Mary regarded him softly. "I haven't been to many social events since my husband passed. Tonight feels a bit overwhelming for me, too." They fell into a companionable silence as the orchestra shifted to a slower melody. The gentle strings and hushed piano cast a warm, intimate atmosphere. Without warning, Mary extended her hand. "Shall we dance?" Daniel's heart gave a startled thump. I'm not good at dancing." She smiled reassuringly. "Neither am I, really. But it might be fun." Tentatively, he took her hand, and they moved onto the dance floor. Surrounded by wealthy donors and executives, Daniel felt acutely aware of how humble his origins were. Yet in Mary's presence, that awareness slowly receded. They danced, swaying gently to the music. She guided him more than he guided her, leading with subtle steps. "Thank you," Mary murmured near his ear, her breath warm against his neck. "For saving my life, for believing in GM, for being here." Daniel felt a surge of affection he hadn't expected. As they glided, time seemed to slow. His gaze locked on hers, and he noticed a vulnerability beneath her poised exterior. He wondered if she saw something similar in him, a young man uncertain of his place in the world, yet determined to make something of himself. When the music ended, they lingered, hands still joined. He cleared his throat, stepping back as the applause for the orchestra swelled around them. A faint flush tinged Mary's cheeks, and her eyes gleamed. "It's late," she whispered. "I have to say goodnight to some people, but then I'm heading home. How about you?" Daniel paused, wondering if she was indirectly inviting him to spend more time together. But he decided not to read too much into it. "I'll probably drive back to Flint," he said softly, not trusting himself to say more. They left the dance floor together, heartbeats unsteady. The rest of the evening rushed by in a blur. After a brief farewell, Daniel climbed into his old Honda and drove home in the dark. The memory of Mary's warmth and the soft glow of her eyes replaying over and over in his mind. As weeks turned into months, Daniel's mother showed signs of improvement, aided by more consistent physical therapy he could now afford. At the GM facility, the eco-friendly ambulance project reached its final prototype phase. Caroline commended Daniel for his ingenuity, while Mary's visits continued each time, bringing them closer. One evening, Daniel found himself in Mary's office. She had asked him to join her for a private discussion. He arrived to see her standing at a window, gazing at the city lights below. She turned upon his entrance, a contemplative look on her face. "Daniel," she began, "I want to talk about your future here at GM, and also about us." His heart fluttered. "Us?" he echoed, stepping forward. She nodded. "Yes. You've become important to me, Daniel. More than just an employee. I value your perspective, your honesty, and your company." Her voice trembled faintly. "I've been alone for a long time. My position often means people treat me differently. They see the CEO, not the person. Daniel approached cautiously, heart pounding. "I see both," he said softly. "The CEO and the incredible woman who overcame so much, who gave me a chance when no one else would." She offered a fragile smile. "You saved me first. Maybe we saved each other." He felt a warm flush in his cheeks. Part of him wanted to gather her in his arms, but he hesitated. She was Mary Barra, revered and powerful. Could there really be a place for him in her world beyond a professional role? Sensing his turmoil, Mary took a step closer. "There's more. I've been thinking about expansions and new ventures at GM. I want you to be part of something new, leading an innovative garage concept that designs custom solutions for emergency vehicles nationwide." Daniel's eyes widened. That was his dream, to have his own garage, to create something that truly helped people. Only this was on a scale he'd never imagined. He tried to speak, but no words came out. She gently took his hand. "We'll fund the operation, but you'll be in charge of day-to-day. I believe in you, Daniel, and not just professionally. I care for you." His breath caught, and everything he'd felt building up inside, admiration, gratitude, and undeniable attraction surged to the surface. He clasped her hand tighter. "Mary, I feel the same. I never saw this coming. I don't know how to handle it." Her face softened. "We handle it together. Carefully, thoughtfully. We have to be mindful of company protocols, the public perception. But if you're willing, we can find a way." He looked into her eyes, seeing both vulnerability and fierce determination, the same qualities that had propelled her to the top of the automotive industry. He gently reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. "I'm willing," he whispered. She leaned into his touch, and for a moment they stood there, the hum of the city lights, below a distant murmur. Time paused, a suspended breath, in the hush of that corporate office. Finally, she tilted her head, and their lips met in a tender, tentative kiss, an affirmation of everything unspoken, yet deeply felt. When they parted, Daniel felt dizzy with emotion. Mary's eyes glistened, and her smile was as radiant as he'd ever seen it. She squeezed his hand. "We have to be discreet for now. But I want to see where this goes, where we go." Daniel nodded, heart alive with possibilities. "I want that too." In the days that followed, the details of the new venture took shape. GM planned to allocate a special budget for a pilot program, Cole's Advanced Emergency Solutions. Mary insisted Daniel name it however he liked. With a rush of humility and pride, he realized he could at last fulfill a version of his lifelong dream. A high-tech garage that developed and modified emergency vehicles to save lives. The public story would be that Mary Barra recognized Daniel's talents in the aftermath of the ambulance incident. Internally, the relationship between them remained a quiet secret, one they guarded with mutual respect. For Daniel, the synergy of professional growth and personal affection felt miraculous. He saw in Mary a mentor, a partner, and perhaps, just perhaps, the chance for love he had once given up on finding. His mother Linda noticed a new light in her son's eyes, though he was careful about details. She teased him gently. "So who's the special someone making you smile like that?" Daniel just chuckled, promising to explain soon enough. Meanwhile, the final tests for the eco-friendly ambulance were a resounding success. Hospitals in Flint and beyond expressed interest. Mary congratulated the team, shining a spotlight on Daniel's contributions. At the celebratory gathering, she raised a toast to them all, eyes lingering on Daniel with a private warmth that sent a thrill through him. Afterward, they slipped away for a quiet moment in a secluded hallway. Her gaze was filled with pride. "This is only the beginning." He smiled back, feeling the weight of her words. Indeed, it was the beginning of a new professional chapter and a deeply intimate journey with someone he never dreamed he'd stand beside. Weeks later, a modest, groundbreaking ceremony was held for Cole's Advanced Emergency Solutions, a name Daniel had chosen to pay homage to his father, and the dream he'd once sketched in a tattered notebook. A small contingent of GM executives, community leaders, and even local hospital representatives attended. Linda, standing tall with a walker, watched her son cut the ribbon. Tears of joy glittered in her eyes as cameras flashed. For Daniel, the ceremony symbolized triumph over adversity. He remembered the day he got fired at Murdoch's for doing the right thing. Now, he was spearheading a revolutionary project that would potentially save thousands of lives. Mary stood beside him, offering her public congratulations, though no one else knew the depth of their bond. Later, in the privacy of the newly constructed workshop, they shared a quiet moment. The place smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Daniel slipped an arm around her waist, and she leaned into him, letting out a contented sigh. "You did it," she whispered, beaming with pride. "And I'm so proud of you." Daniel looked around the workshop, flooded with gratitude. "We did it," he corrected softly. In that moment, he realized the tapestry of life could sometimes weave heartbreak and hope in the strangest of ways. He had lost a job, but found a calling. He had saved a stranger, but gained a partner in both business and in life. The road ahead would have its challenges, balancing personal and professional spheres, navigating public scrutiny. But for once, Daniel felt equipped to face it all. Yes, he was still the same humble mechanic at heart, a man who believed in fixing what was broken. But now he had the resources, the platform, and the love to do so on a grander scale than he ever imagined. This was his second chance, and he'd embrace it with every part of his being. And so the story came full circle, proving that sometimes the simplest act of kindness can unlock doors you never knew existed. The best roads are seldom the ones you plan. They're the ones you stumble upon by being true to your conscience. In saving Mary Barra, Daniel Cole saved himself too. And together they embarked on a new journey, powered by compassion, fueled by innovation, and steered by a devotion that defied the odds. Thank you for joining Daniel Cole on his extraordinary journey, a once struggling mechanic who risked everything to save a stranger, only to discover he'd rescued the very CEO of General Motors. From losing his job to igniting a groundbreaking new venture, Daniel's story shows that doing the right thing can transform your life in ways you never imagined. It's a testament that compassion and resilience can overcome even the toughest obstacles, turning dark chapters into hope-filled tomorrows. If this tale of courage, love, and unexpected second chances touched your heart, we invite you to be part of our growing community. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out on more inspiring stories. Your support helps us bring more tales of real-life heroes and extraordinary moments into the spotlight. Together, let's celebrate the human spirit and keep the flame of possibility burning bright.